really important part of my practice is destruction and being comfortable in the world of destruction. Often my practice is just one massive tug of war with like a WWE wrestler. That's what it feels like. It feels like difficult. And I love to almost attack the canvas sometimes. I love the tactile nature of paint. Self-doubt is always going to be there. Always use it as a tool for moving forward. It's there in your gut for a reason. Something telling you that the work isn't quite there yet. I like to start off with something like quite concrete and then getting lost in it and kind of having doubt, but then overcoming the doubt and then making something completely kind of bewildering to me. I'll have a certain plan in mind and it'll always go off script. So it will always kind of end up somewhere completely different and unintentional. But I like that. When I'm painting, I just am a little bit clueless to it. 4 or 5 hours later, I'll kind of wake up as if from a dream and then kind of see what I've done. It'll get to a point where I get stuck, usually. It's like a bad relationship. I need to like kind of just spend my time away from that painting. And once you've come over that kind of hump, you'll come out the other side with something really interesting and something bewildering, hopefully. My name is Bagilhole. I'm a painter, filmmaker and tattoo artist from North Wales, and I'm here in the Jackson studio to speak about my work. I just feel like it's second nature to hold a paintbrush in my hand. It's always been there. I think one of my earliest memories is picking up a paintbrush in my dad's studio and just messing around with it on an easel. Since then, it's been my go-to comfort tool of making art. My dad, Robin Bagilhole, was predominantly a screen print artist, and he'd make these kind of repeated patterns of certain symbols. And then later on in his life, he made one last series of paintings. Like my whole career, I've thought about that body of work. Those like 12 paintings. They're like my Bible. They're really, really crucial to my practice because that's my blood. And they were called A Year with Miss Jones, which is my mum's name. So then he passed away like shortly after making that last body of work. When he passed away, he didn't leave much behind other than all of his materials. Ever since then, that's just been my go-to vocabulary in making art. It's just been, that's all I've wanted to do is just paint. Growing up in rural North Wales, in the sticks of Snowdonia, when I was a lot younger, I used to go down to the porch and steal all my parents' clothes and my sisters and mine, take them off the clothes rack, take it outside, put it on the front garden and make giant sculptures of people out on the grass there, just to annoy my mum and dad. I also grew up in Almería. It was kind of a desert landscape. It felt like I was in a cowboy film, in a Wild West film, like a John Ford. I now love to paint kind of matadors and bulls and like really sparse desert kind of landscapes, and a lot of that time and a lot of my childhood is what comes back through in the painting, and it peeks through and echoes in and reverbs in different kind of sections of my practice now. Golden acrylics has quite a special place in my heart because when I was growing up and when my father passed, he left, I think, 50 tubes of golden acrylics, and I held on to them for a good 10 years. I'd use them so rarely. The golden acrylics world didn't exist in my sphere at that time. So I just thought they were these magical paints from the 70s that my dad had left behind that they were unattainable anymore. I've always been a big super fan of acrylic. I like the speed that it dries at. I like the texture that you can get it to leave. I like the fluidity of it. Often I'll mix acrylic with salt or different types of sand, the way they blend together, or if you use a charcoal stick and then just wipe it with your sleeve, it's just leaves this kind of trace of kind of a ghostly mark. The water is my medium. I love using that with acrylic and I just understand the way it moves and how to leave a figure look like it used to be there. A lot of my work concentrates on kind of earthly elements. There's a lot of fire, there's a lot of sea, kind of forestry, mountain landscapes, and when I use salt within the work, it particularly reminds me of my hometown because the place I was born and raised in is called Pwllheli, and it's got a second kind of sentence to it. It's Pwllheli Pwllhalen, which is Pwllheli salt pool. It just makes me paint a certain way. It makes me paint in a familiar fashion. It makes me paint kind of stories of my childhood somehow. They kind of naturally have that effect on my work. Kind of these eerie figures and eerie kind of spirits of animals and things in the work, And I think a lot of that is inspired by these kind of ghostly, paranormal stories that I'd heard when I was young. One night my grandmother was asleep and she was lying next to my granddad, who was a big burly man, fast asleep snoring. So she looked down into the fireplace and lights kind of started to shine from the fireplace, and a man crawled out and he started screaming, but with no voice coming out, and he was screaming and pointing at my granddad, furiously trying to wake him up, and he wouldn't wake up until the man just walked right back into the fireplace and was never to be seen again. My grandmother then contacted the local magic circle, which was a group of vicars that were also exorcists, and they'd come to the house and said there was a passing spirit walking through. I don't fully believe in this kind of thing, but that story in itself is just like a kind of a plethora for like visual inspiration for like a lot of work. So those are the kind of stories that kind of stick to mind when I think about the paranormal, especially within North Wales. I remember wanting to be an artist. In North Wales, it feels like it's kind of a career that's going to be way too difficult, or it's not possible. I think you're either going to be a carpenter or a farmer or a plumber or an electrician. My mum persuaded me to take the foundation course at Coleg Menai in Bangor. It was just electric. You kind of get to find your feet with whichever direction you want to go, and then for the next foreseeing kind of like 7 months, you concentrate on one thing. So for me, it was just kind of painting, and that's all I wanted to do. A tutor called Owen Prendergast took a shine to my work, and he literally paved the way for my career moving on from that point, because it was the first time I really felt like someone took confidence in the work I was making. It shifted my whole perspective on making art and kind of refocused my energy into then moving on from that point. I think I learnt more in that year than I did in the 3 years of my degree, just because it was so hands-on, so full-on. I won the Peter Prendergast Drawing Prize, so it was a real kind of push to my confidence. And my mum was always supportive and just kind of saying, go for it. So I went for it. Kind of my practice kind of feels fossilized into like the same way it's always been. For as long as I remember, there's always been a set style there. It's a kind of a guttural thing. But recently I've tried to kind of shift away from that a little bit and try to just kind of teach myself the fundamentals of like colour theory and how to paint a face correctly. This is stuff that I completely ignored prior. I wanted a face to just do the work itself. So then I started to just kind of paint faces over and over and over, and it came down to just simplicity. So not to try and put too much detail in the eye, like the eyelashes or nostrils or anything like that. It would turn out to just be kind of a couple of lines in the eyes, 1 line for the nose, 2 lines for the lips, and let the paint do the rest of the talking. When I was growing up and throughout my whole practice almost, I treated colour the same way I treated my studio, just chaos. I mean, there was colours flying around everywhere. I wouldn't really take any particular care in it. I think I always felt like I just had an instinct in colour, especially from seeing my dad's work growing up. There's like every colour under the sun in his paintings, and I thought I could do the same. But I think nowadays, after growing up a little bit, I've realised that palettes are kind of important, and that limiting the palette that I use is quite crucial to the work. It explains the storytelling differently. For example, I use this particular shade of red that I make myself. I say it's like a light cherry red, that's what I would call it. It's like kind of not a very strong one, it's kind of pastel. It has this effect, again, it reminds me of the salt, it kind of reminds me of home, this colour. And the red dragon kind of, it just like ties in with that. I use various different brands for different colour paints. So I found what I think is the best pigment from different various brands. For example, some System 3 I think work perfectly fine for like a titanium white. Like yellow, I'd need to go to like a golden acrylics, which has a stronger pigment. I love a Payne's grey, I love a Mars black, I love an Ivory black, bone white. Anything that's like a colour but just a bit off, I'm usually a fan of. So like an off black, an off white. The colours that I despise would be a kind of royal purple, makes me want to vomit. It never goes to plan. So I'll make a select palette for the painting, and then I'll print it out and put it next to the painting. And then 2 weeks later, there's like 3 or 4 different random colours that are on the painting that weren't ever meant to be there. I remember the first time I came to London for the interview was the kind of first time I'd been on a train by myself or down an escalator by myself. So it was all very new to me. I applied for the for UAL to try and get into CSM, but because that's where my dad taught, he taught foundation in St Martin's. Unfortunately, I didn't get in there. So then I tried to get into Chelsea, which I luckily got in, and I was super, super excited and happy about it. I really enjoyed my time there, but I think maybe it was the wrong university for me because it was quite conceptual art school. I think over time it's had a long-term effect where it's helped my practice now because I've been able to kind of slow things down a little bit. When I was in uni, I would just kind of going blindly, paint anything kind of as fast as I could. And nowadays I'm taking a more measured approach. And I think a lot of it has to do with kind of echoes of what they said. I have no clue how to speak about my work, really, especially at that time. I would try and put as many canvases on the wall as I could possibly fit in my small kind of square meter wall space that I had and just try and paint relentlessly. I remember one group crit where the tutor was looking at this giant painting that I made, and it got to my turn to speak about the work, and I was sat there in front of this big painting, and she looked at my socks, and they had some cactuses on them, and she said, "I like those socks more than that painting." And then kind of walked out the crit, which I was just like flabbergasted by shock. But I think it's because I was being so stubborn. And I remember like speaking to my mum on the phone and she was outraged, but it did kick me into gear, into a different direction. So I remember a couple of the tutors, they'd seen my music video that I produced in foundation. And it was kind of just, at the time when I was in foundation, I'd made it as a side thing just to try and get in a like higher grade. For me, it was just a music video. It wasn't even a piece of work, but for them, it was like an art piece. And they said that I need to elaborate on the filmmaking, try and kind of continue with that. So I tried. So I kind of went for it with the filmmaking. I bought an old DSLR, just like a crappy old Nikon, and then I used it to make a lot of videos with me and my sister back home in Wales. For my final piece in Chelsea, I made this kind of giant painting. I actually did a lot better in the end than I was expecting, and I managed to get a distinction. It felt, again, like the Peter Prendergast drawing prize. It was kind of that feeling all over again. I just felt like fortunate, and I felt really happy because I had worked my ass off on that particular like piece. The same face keeps cropping up in work, Edwin, and I like to keep it a mystery to myself and to other people. He kind of comes in and out of work, and I don't think there's any real specific significance to him as a character, and he's the only character I've ever named, and he's kind of been appearing since I was in Coleg Menai in Bangor. I'm not going to tell anyone where that name came from or where it originated, but there was a specific day, specific time where something happened, and I thought that's going to be the name of this character that will be coming to the work. Growing up on a dairy farm in North Wales, we were kind of surrounded by animals. Every time like I painted a cow or a dog or a chicken, it just feels like some kind of like passing spirit or some kind of nod to a memory from a long time ago. There's a white dog that's a reoccurring theme in my work. This dog just feels like kind of a friendly spirit, or even like a person that's kind of passing through. These animals kind of feel like guardians in a way. They are looking over the people in the painting, and they're there to somehow, watch them. In my practice, kind of delve into thematics of light and shade quite often. So in a body of work or in a series, I like to be playful on one side, and then I like to kind of explore grief and other kind of feelings on the other side of the practice. And often I like to explore humour, or I try to, and then it ends up being sad anyway. So sometimes I'll aim for something I find quite funny, and then it'll end up being like a tragic painting. You never really know how it's going to end up. I feel like if I could make every canvas 14 foot, I would do that. For me, it's always been the bigger the better. I'm also just faster at painting on larger canvases. When I'm making a small kind of A4 piece, it might take me a couple of months because I'm dreading it. And I just think it just has more of an impression for people who look at them in galleries. Like I like to, when it gets to the stage of going onto the exhibition wall, for you to stand back and have more of an impact. I don't paint the sides clean or anything like that once a painting is done. I quite like to have that kind of rugged, messy look. I think if I paint the sides, it kind of makes it more of a picture. And I think having it kind of as rugged as I can leave it, it just feels like you were there with the artist in the studio as they were making it. I'm comfortable with it not being constantly set in a certain way. I'm happy with it kind of always being a kind of changing factor in my work. The edge of my canvases are usually areas for me to scribble on, to write on. So when I'm painting, sometimes I'll kind of have random sentences or words come into mind, scribble down a sentence, forget about it, and then kind of catch it with the corner of my eye sometimes and realise what I've written down. And often it'll become the title for the painting, or it will actually just inspire a complete new painting from just that single sentence. What if I just place a word above a painting to start with and see what that changes about an image? Originally, I'd basically got a light box and made about 100 drawings, 100 sketches of different paintings or possible paintings. And then I had tons of words, like words I'd been building for like 6 months in my head. Like I'd be cycling and I'd think of a word and I'd have to stop and kind of write it down in my notes. Some wouldn't work at all, and then some would be like the perfect fit. I didn't really even know that there was a lot of painters out there that were kind of similar to my style or that were doing that out there successfully. So as soon as I started to find Instagram and find artists that were kind of really successful, I thought, okay, maybe it is doable because these people are doing it. I'm going to just give it a go. So then I started to kind of work away and chip away at building an audience through Instagram. After university, I got a job in a pub in Camberwell called the Tiger. Kind of a rough old pub. There was a lot of like funny instances that happened there, a lot of bar fights, kind of a lot of strange paranormal activity in the pub, a lot of like strange things that would like inspire a lot of things for paintings later down the line. One of the customers came in and he said he liked the way I was working or kind of managing the bar shift there, and he said, I'm opening a brewery down the road. Do you want to come and work for me? So I said, let's do it. Why not? So then that was the next 5 years of my life after that. So I ended up managing this brewery that kind of went from 2 people to 110 people towards the end. So it was a really big project. And towards the end of the 5 years I was there, I started to sell work through Instagram. I decided I'm just going to give it a go and cut loose, it was bittersweet because I really enjoyed the brewery job. I got free beers for kind of months. So that was brilliant. But yeah, if I hadn't taken that leap, the thing would have changed and I wouldn't be here now practicing as a full-time artist. Yeah, shortly after leaving this brewery job, I had kind of a desire to also become a tattoo artist, mainly because I wanted to try and turn my paintings into tattoos and just see how they would look like on myself. I bought a machine on eBay and hopped on YouTube and started tattooing my legs, which was a bit of a mistake at the beginning, to be honest, because they ended up looking terrible. About a year later, I'd kind of practiced enough on my legs and kind of scribbled all over them enough to the point where I felt confident in tattooing other people. And now it's become hand in hand what I do with painting. Often I'll make a painting and then I'll take aspects from the painting and I'll turn them into tattoos. A lot of the tattoos I've done on myself. I've got an armful of my own tattoos here, which are kind of difficult to do because you've only got one hand to do it. So you've got to kind of put your arm in between your legs and stretch your skin and hope for the best because you're quite far away from it. So it's got a little bit of a risk, but it's there now. So yeah. I love to use sketchbooks. You can make absolute rubbish in there and it's fine. It's often my go-to before starting a painting. That's where I can kind of be a bit looser and a bit less strict with myself. It's all quite natural. It all happens without me knowing almost. But when thinking about composition, I'll always have like a set structure of things, how things could look and where things should be placed. But then often it never makes sense. I know that the first thing I do is create a wash, like a large scale wash, and I'll kind of go really loosely with very watered down acrylic. And I kind of like to pool it. So sometimes I'll put the canvas on the floor, paint it with a mop or with a large brush and kind of let bodies of water sit in it. It leaves like this beautiful kind of layer of crusted paint, which can leave for some really nice textures later. And then from then on, I kind of start building up thicker layers of paint, and I love to kind of blur paint quite often. So I'll use quite heavy, thick acrylic and blur it slightly with a dry brush. And a bit of chaos, a bit of kind of fast-paced painting. It'll get to a point where I get stuck usually, or I kind of get sick of the work and I'll need some time away from it. It's like a bad relationship. I need to like kind of just spend my time away from that painting. So I usually have like a week off, or it will just be there in the studio and I know it's there and I'm looking at it and I'm just choosing to ignore it. But I can't really. I think about it all the time. I'll think about it when I go to bed. I'll come to the studio randomly one day and I'll just have it, hopefully, and I'll just get cracking. And then the next part of painting becomes a lot slower usually. It's a lot of like back and forth of kind of deliberation, painting. So off the back of kind of a few different various exhibitions, I got to this kind of big one in Korea. They asked for about 40, 50 paintings, and it was a kind of 2-story new build museum that was being built whilst I was making the work. So by the time I'd get to Korea, it was kind of just done one exhibition before that. It felt kind of like a fever dream almost, because I just couldn't believe I was there. It was like I wanted to pinch myself every 2 seconds. It was just a wild feeling. I remember even the way that they have private views there is very different to the way that it's formatted in kind of the UK and what I was used to. Rather than having a bit of a shindig and in a private view and having some drinks with your friends and stuff, it was like an audience. So it'll be a room of 100 people on chairs when you get in. Everyone's very formally dressed, and like I'm expected to make a speech. But right before I went up to make the speech, they'd hired a opera singer to come on, and he sang some Welsh anthems. So I got a lot of flashbacks to the time that I was scraping gutters on a scaffolding in North Wales, on a windy hillside in an old farmhouse, absolutely miserable. And another time when I was following a tractor around a field, putting rocks in a bucket for £20 a day. The vast difference in what I was seeing in front of me was just like astronomical. To see where I was at that time was amazing. Prendergast, I remember him saying in one of the mornings in work, he said Billy will just grab anything he sees and he'll just paint on it. I think nowadays it's not far off the same, so I still like to just kind of paint on whatever I can grab. There is a specific thing that I do like doing with some canvases where I use transparent gesso and I use volcanic sand, the stuff that I collected from Iceland, and I'll loosely sprinkle it onto the canvas with this transparent gesso, so when it dries it's just a layer of kind of raw canvas with speckles of this volcanic sand, and then I'll do quite a minimal charcoal drawing over the top of it. When it comes to the side of like painting and what materials I use, what tools I use, it's again similar to the kind of mindset that I had with materials. It's like whatever I can get my hands on. Like the bigger the brush, the better sometimes, and I like quite a hard bristle to make the wash. So I like to kind of splash it around, leave a little bit of tracing of some kind of paintbrush marks in there. And I think the later the stages go throughout the painting process, the smaller I tend to go with the paintbrushes. So like they'll start really thick and then they'll just work their way down as I go into the painting process. Towards the end, I like to use the thinnest, tiniest little like rounded head paintbrushes just to make tiny little marks. But there's just a pot of them. I leave it down to instinct and I kind of just go with whatever's my gut's going with at that point. I also use my sleeve. I'll use my hands. I'll use like just bits of whatever's on the floor to kind of make marks. Anything that I can find around me, I'll use to make a mark with. In my practice, I love to draw with different types of tools. More often than not, I will be using different width of pencils and that kind of boldness of pencils. And I'll always use a white pencil to go over any drawing that I do towards the end of it, to kind of blur the edges a little bit and make it feel a certain way. At the moment, I'm using some Derwent ones in the studio. Great for kind of everything, really. When I'm getting stuck in a rut, what I like to do is snap a paintbrush in half and use that as like a quill to make ink drawings. I'll try and make as many ink drawings as I can in an hour. I'll like set a timer. Most of them end up really looking terrible, but there's a few ideas that come out of them that I quite like. Eating a plate full of like Sunday roast. If you overeat on spuds, right, you're gonna feel sick. For me, it's like, the painting's right when you just feel just the amount of right full. When it gets to that point where I'm at the tip of my struggle, get to the iPad, take photos, and just start like kind of painting away on there. And it feels a lot easier because there's nothing expensive there. I'm not wasting any gold acrylics. I'm just layering on the iPad. And it also allows me to be a lot freer with the mark making. And I can throw it away. For me, it's good old-fashioned walking away from the canvas that works a treat. Literal physical distance away from the work. That I take constant walks back and forth. I must do 10,000 steps in a day because I'm painting, and then I'll walk to the other side of this long room and look back, and that's kind of one of my most prolific tools. Shortly after, usually feeling like the painting's on the tip of a knife's edge and it's about to tip over and it might be in the wrong place, and I've taken a step back and thought, just leave it for a day. That's usually when it's done. My studio space, which is in South London in Deptford, is an absolute pit of chaos at the moment. Towards the end of the body of work, the studio becomes an absolute tip. After I've finally made 100 or so drawings, and it gets to the time where I'm actually excited to paint, because I like to make a build up. I like to kind of get to the point where I'm like super excited, and then I allow myself to paint. 3 or 4 hours will pass when I'm painting, and I'm just kind of in the thick of it all, feeling super chaotic, and it's just like really hard to find things, which for me works somehow, because it adds to the chaos of the painting. The whole thing becomes like Tasmanian devil spinning in a tornado, just kind of trying to find his feet. Like I feel like that in the room, and like that I think comes across in parts of the work. I like to start a body of work like a detective would approach a case in a way. Like start with a blank wall and then start adding all these kind of notes and red lines between everything. When I get into the studio, typically I like to get all the boring stuff out of the way first. So I'll try and spend an hour or so just doing the most tedious admin. That way I feel like, okay, bloody hell, I'm excited to go and paint now, finally. Then typically I'll spend maybe an hour just kind of drawing, and after that we just dive right into the painting, and that's where I get lost in all of it. It could be 4 or 5 hours and I have no idea what's just happened. It's kind of all a bit of a bewildering process. It's always music. There's music kind of going all the time, and it's always on like sound cancelling headphones, so there's no interference otherwise. I need it to be kind of slow, I think, a lot of times. It needs to be kind of like folk music, people like Jessica Pratt. I need to tune into like an older era somehow to paint. And then other times it might be punk rock, Australian punk rock, like Amyl and Sniffers. Say if I've got to get to like a tattoo appointment and I've only got an hour left, then I've wasted the rest of the time on YouTube. Then I've really got to like go guns ho and listen to some faster paced music and go for it. I've always had a keen eye on archiving imagery that I find. So whenever I come across something, it could be a snippet of a film or something I see on a walk out in Burgess Park, it could be anything. But I'll always keep it in a folder in my phone, or I'll print it out and put it in various sketchbooks. I often need to have these photographs laid all over the wall in my studio. When I'm painting, they're kind of like speaking to me a little bit in a way that it sounds a little bit woo-woo, but they're kind of just there in the back of my subconscious. And then they'll kind of resurface somehow sometimes in the work. There are a few set artists or specific books and things like that that have definitely kind of paved the way for a lot of my work or have helped. I mean, predominantly it's my dad's work. I'd say that's the foundation of my practice. Other artists that I've always admired would be Philip Guston. I like a quote that Guston said, "There's a mysterious work at play here." And that's what it feels like in my practice. Feels like it elaborates that quite well. Marlene Dumas, Susan Rothenberg, Ed Rusher, anyone who paints really kind of vigorously and like with thick paint and kind of splashes things around and is ruthless with it, I tend to like fall in love with. And a lot of photographers. So there's a photographer called Justine Kirkland who makes kind of these beautiful photographs of people in like rural or Midwest America. There's a book from a fashion designer and photographer called Collier Shaw. The book's called There I Was, and it's this beautiful book of drawings. I think it was a relative of hers that went to the war in Vietnam, and it's like found photographs of him when he was away, and they're like drawings of that period of time. And it's like kind of just this beautiful form of storytelling in just this one book that I've kind of like always loved and always tried to like emulate in my practice. Kind of, I think that's like a great way of looking at a series. In a lot of my practice, I love to look at film and filmmakers like Tarkovsky, who make these kind of eerie, mysterious looking landscapes, a lot of fog. One of my strongest influences is David Lynch. He spoke about like catching ideas as a concept, and catching ideas in terms of fishing. He said, to come up with an interesting idea, you've always got to have your rod in the water. Whenever I start a body of work for a series of paintings, I'll try and draw as many as I can in like a day or like in a few days until I'm exhausted, and I'll have maybe 300 ideas by the end of it. And then I'll kind of absolutely filter it down to maybe 6 ideas that are actually useful. I've always had a certain way of drawing, and I feel like I've always had a certain way of painting. So when kind of stopping for a little bit after a long period of intensely making work, I had time to kind of reflect on the work and try and refocus and to see kind of where I wanted to take it. I constantly battle with it when I'm working. I kind of doubt at painting or doubt at drawing or doubt the idea and the concept. It's overcoming that doubt or using it to your advantage to make better work.